The night air was heavy with dread. Ngozi's lungs burned as she ran barefoot through the cluttered alleys of Mushin, holding her crying infant close to her chest. Her wrapper was torn at the hem, her feet bleeding, her eyes darting behind her at every junction. She could hear the distant shouts of men, rough, urgent voices that reeked danger. Gunshots cracked the night like thunderclaps, and she knew they weren't shooting to scare. They were shooting to kill. The child in her arms whimpered, his soft wail muffled by the torn scarf she'd wrapped around him. Her hands trembled not from exhaustion, but fear, raw and primal. This wasn't just a chase. This was a death sentence. Not just for her, but for the baby too. The baby she had risked everything to protect. The baby of a man who once told her, "I'll protect you always," but had since gone silent. Ngozi had trusted Chief Obinna, Nigeria's construction magnate, more than she trusted God himself. But now, there was only one truth. No one was coming to save her. She had to save her child. She ducked behind a stack of abandoned tires, panting hard. She could see the men's shadows stretch across the wall just ahead, silhouettes of hired killers sent by one woman, Stella, the wife. The woman who could not give Chief Obinna a son. The woman whose smile never reached her eyes. The woman who had found out that Ngozi, the so-called mistress from the village, had not only shared her husband's bed, but had birthed the heir she never could. Ngozi knew too much. And now, Stella wanted her erased. Forever. Ngozi held her baby tighter, kissed his tiny forehead, and whispered through her tears, "You will live, Chabik, even if I don't." She limped through the shadowed pathway, and came to a corner where trash bins overflowed onto the earth. The stench was unbearable, but in that filth, she saw sanctuary. Without hesitation, Ngozi unwrapped her child, kissed him again, and carefully placed him inside an old basket between torn nylons and crushed cartons. She whispered prayers into the night, weeping like her soul was being torn in two. "Let someone kind find you. Let someone love you more than I ever could. Please." Then she ran back into the alley and screamed, drawing the men away from the basket, away from her son. Minutes later, silence returned to the alley, and the moon watched the infant like a silent witness. The gunmen never returned to search the trash. They assumed the mistress had run off with the baby still in her arms. They would later report she jumped into the canal, that both mother and child were gone. Ngozi, now hiding deep in an abandoned building across town, held her breath as the footsteps faded. Her heart ached like death. She didn't know who would find her son. She didn't know if he'd survive the cold night. But one thing she knew with absolute certainty: it was better for him to grow up with nothing than to die with everything. Her silence would be her shield, and her sacrifice would be her love. The morning sun had barely peeked above the horizon when Mama Grace shuffled into the alley, her feet dragging against the ground like an old memory. Her back was hunched from years of hardship, her skin toughened by time and survival. A faded wrapper clung to her frail body, and a large black nylon sack hung across her back like a shadow. This was her routine, searching trash heaps for plastic bottles, tin cans, and anything recyclable that could earn her a few naira. She was invisible to the world, just another poor widow collecting scraps in a city that had long forgotten her name. But that morning, something pulled her toward the corner where the bins overflowed. She didn't hear a cry. Not at first. She heard silence, a strange, sacred silence, as though the air was holding its breath. Then a soft whimper, a faint sound that could have been mistaken for a wounded animal. But she knew that cry. It was the cry of a baby, a helpless soul abandoned by the world. She dropped her sack, heart pounding in her chest. Her old legs moved faster than they had in years. She yanked away layers of torn cloth and plastic until she saw the face, dark-skinned, tiny lips trembling, a pair of innocent eyes blinking slowly beneath dried tears. "Jesus," she gasped, falling to her knees. "Nah, baby be this?" Her voice cracked, as though her soul couldn't contain the shock. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the child, who immediately nestled into her bony chest like he knew safety had arrived. Mama Grace looked around. No sign of any mother. No note. No one. Just her and this child who had been left for the rats. She held him tighter and felt warmth spill from her eyes, tears she hadn't shed in years. "God, what'd I go do with Pekin?" she whispered. But even in her questioning, she was already removing her scarf and wrapping it around the child's shivering frame. She didn't take him to the police station. Something told her not to. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear that they would take him and forget him in some cold orphanage. She didn't even tell the church. She took him home to her one room, face me I face you, and warmed water on her rusty kerosene stove. She cleaned his tiny body and wrapped him in an old wrapper with holes. As he lay on the mat and looked up at her, she whispered the name that came to her heart, Chabik. "Because God gave me strength to find you." That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the boy and made a vow. "I no get anything, but as long as I day breathe, you go survive. You go live, my son. You go live." And outside, as the city roared and moved on, a forgotten boy slept in the arms of a forgotten woman who would become his world. Mama Grace raised Chabik in silence. She didn't announce him to the neighbors, nor did she take him to the health center for a birth certificate. She knew the dangers of questions that came with answers she didn't have. In her compound, she told people the child was her late sister's grandchild from the village, abandoned by a drunken uncle. People pitied her, but mostly they gossiped. "This old woman won't kill herself with burden," they said. But Mama Grace didn't mind. Her joy was in the child's laughter, in the way he called her mama with his soft voice, in how he clung to her when thunder roared. The boy was special, curious, quiet, and smart beyond his years. By the time he turned 4, he could read signboards and count bottle caps. Mama Grace began to believe he was a gift sent by God himself to give her life meaning again. She sold more trash, worked harder, even began sewing buttons for a tailor down the street. All for Chabik. But she was careful, very careful. Every time she saw a black Jeep drive past, her heart skipped. Every time someone knocked too loud, she'd hide Chabik under the bed. The fear wasn't logical. It lived in her bones. She didn't know who might come for him, but the way she found him, the strange air that surrounded his arrival, it all made her believe he wasn't just any child. She'd seen things in her youth. Stories of rich men who hide shame with bloodshed, of children whose inheritance is sealed in death. So she raised Chabik like a secret planted in dry soil. He grew quietly, like a tree determined to live. When he asked who his real parents were, she told him they died in a car crash. It was a lie, but one that kept him safe. Or so she believed. Meanwhile, in Ikoyi, Chief Obinna mourned privately. His heart never healed from Ngozi's disappearance. He never stopped wondering. The police declared her dead, but he never saw her body. And the baby? Lost. Possibly drowned. Stella never brought it up again. Instead, she immersed herself in philanthropy and false appearances. But in her heart, she rejoiced. The threat was gone, or so she thought. She had no idea that the boy her men failed to find had been rescued from a trash heap. That her greatest threat was growing quietly in a slum, calling another woman mama, and slowly preparing, unknowingly, for a destiny no one could erase. In the palatial estate nestled in the heart of Ikoyi, Madame Stella sat in her velvet-lined bedroom, staring at an old photograph of her husband and the young woman she once called a village embarrassment. Her hand trembled slightly as she crushed the photo and threw it into the fireplace. 10 years had passed since Ngozi disappeared, and yet the shame lingered like an unwashed stain. Ngozi had been everything Stella was not. Young, fertile, soft-spoken, and worst of all, loved by Chief Obinna in a way Stella had never experienced. Stella had tolerated his mistresses in silence over the years, but Ngozi had been different. Ngozi had gotten pregnant. Ngozi had been kept in a private apartment, paid in foreign currency, and treated like royalty. And when Ngozi birthed the child, a boy, Stella's carefully controlled world cracked. Her rage became a hurricane. She had demanded that the child and his mother be erased from the surface of the earth. But despite the men's report that they were both dead, she had never fully believed it. Her spirit still twitched whenever Obinna went silent for too long. The man still grieved in secret, still paid people to keep looking, as if looking for a ghost. Even now, as she wore the garb of First Lady of the Home and smiled at society gatherings, her womb burned with bitterness. Her 3 daughters were well-bred and well-groomed, but to her in-laws, they were simply the girls. The whispers were constant. Stella no fit-born boy, the chief go carry another wife soon, na only Ngozi give him heir. She masked her pain with cruelty, directing her venom at the maids, drivers, and even her daughters. The oldest Kamsi had become her shadow, arrogant, proud, and emotionally hollow. Stella poured her poison into the child, raising her to mock weakness, despise humility, and never cry. Yet deep down, Stella knew the only thing that could preserve her place in that house was if the truth never surfaced. If the world never knew that Ngozi's child might still be alive, that somewhere a boy with Obina's blood and entitlement might one day return. The fear kept her awake at night. It kept her suspicious, constantly bribing police officers to give her updates on orphanage records, street rumors, and whispered stories of children found in the gutter. When the latest private investigator she had on payroll called and said there was a strange match in Mushin, her blood ran cold. She pretended not to care, nodding as he explained something about an old widow with a boy whose birth story didn't match up. But after the call, she paced her garden like a caged animal. Mushin? Of all places? She knew poor people raised other people's children all the time. But a widow? A boy with no birth certificate? Her fingers twitched. What if this was the child? What if the boy had lived? She couldn't afford to be wrong. She couldn't afford to be weak. Not after all she had done. And so that night, as the chandelier glowed over her gold-tinted ceiling, Madame Stella made a phone call to a man who handled her dirty work. A man who never asked questions. Go to Mushin, she said in Igbo, voice as calm as death. Find the widow. Find the boy. But make sure no one finds out. Chibik never knew a life of comfort. His earliest memories were of Mama Grace's soft humming as she combed his hair with a small broken comb and of the smell of burnt rice and kerosene. Their one-room face-me-I-face-you apartment leaked when it rained and was hellishly hot during dry season. Yet it was home. Mama Grace taught him contentment before he ever understood the word. Every morning before school, she handed him a cracked plastic lunchbox filled with gari and groundnut. And every evening she recited proverbs to him like lullabies. When the goat learns how to climb, the owner builds a higher fence. She raised him not just to survive, but to think. Chibik grew up knowing the value of 1 naira, the sting of insults, and the dignity in silence. He learned how to fetch water with cracked buckets, how to endure hunger without complaint, and how to run errands for neighbors who barely acknowledged him. And when other children mocked him for being Mama Grace's trash child, he only smiled. Despite the teasing, Chibik excelled in school. His teachers often pulled Mama Grace aside during PTA meetings and said, "This boy is different. His brain day work like computer." He devoured books like food, even sneaking into the local Anglican library to read while other boys played football. He could recite Chinua Achebe and solve quadratic equations by age 11. But intelligence didn't pay school fees. Every term was a struggle. Mama Grace sold off her last set of wrappers, took loans from her women's contribution group, and even begged in the market square, all to keep Chibik in school. At night, she would whisper to herself, "This boy go be somebody. He no fit die like ordinary person." And sometimes, when Chibik heard her sobbing in her corner, he would pretend to be asleep. He knew she was tired. He knew she carried a burden she never explained. And in his heart, he vowed he would one day lift that burden off her shoulders. But even as they fought to survive, strange things began happening. Mama Grace started noticing unfamiliar men around the compound. Men who asked too many questions. Men who loitered too long near her window. Once, she returned from the market and found her room slightly ajar, her cooking pots turned upside down, and Chibik's school uniform torn in the corner. No money was stolen. No phones. Just things disturbed. It was a message, and she understood it loud and clear. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't want them to be comfortable. She doubled her vigilance, started locking the doors twice, and even kept a knife under her mattress. She told no one, not even the landlord. But one night, she looked at Chabik as he slept and whispered, "You day bring wall away you know Sabi." She kissed his forehead. "But I go die before dem touch you." And with that silent vow, Mama Grace prepared for a storm she could no longer deny was coming. Chief Obinna sat at the edge of his study, staring at the flickering light of his desktop screen, his fingers twitching restlessly beside a half-empty glass of scotch. It had been 16 years since Ngozi vanished with his son, and yet the memory clung to his heart like a parasite. He had built an empire. Yes, hotels in Abuja, housing estates in Port Harcourt, a pipeline contract with the government, but none of it filled the hole in his soul. The tabloids called him Nigeria's silent tycoon, but behind the boardroom success was a man haunted by a single question. What if my son is still alive? He had spent millions over the years funding private investigations, paying bribes, even consulting traditional seers. Most of them were useless. They fell into the river, one said. They crossed into Benin Republic, another claimed. But no body was ever found. And, as a father, Obinna knew, deep in his bones, that his son didn't die that night. That Ngozi had sacrificed something to save him. He never confronted Stella. There were whispers. There were even rumors among his senior staff that Stella had paid off local boys to track Ngozi down. But no proof. Stella played her part well, flawless at charity balls, devoted to church, always respectful in public. But Obinna had caught glimpses, moments when her face hardened during family conversations, when she flinched at any mention of Ngozi, when she refused to allow Chabik Foundation scholarships in his company. Stella was not innocent. And Obinna knew that if she ever found out the boy was alive, she would bury him again, this time for good. So when one of his old investigators, a retired DSS agent, sent him a coded message that a boy in Mushin had features strikingly similar to him, Obinna's heart skipped. He didn't tell anyone, not his daughters, not his lawyer. He simply pulled out an old photo of Ngozi and stared at the curve of her eyes, the sharpness of her cheekbones, the same shape that now existed in a boy from the slums. The next morning, Obinna sent his most trusted driver, Baba Kure, with instructions. Go to Mushin. Observe. No contact. Just tell me what you see. What Baba Kure saw shocked him. An old widow struggling with bags of bottles. A boy in tattered uniform, yet speaking fluent English. A boy who addressed elders with the kind of honor that's learned, not taught. He took a picture and sent it to Obinna, who dropped his phone in disbelief. It was like looking into a mirror of the past. That nose, those eyes, that boy. Could it be? But Obinna didn't move yet. He needed confirmation, DNA, documents, proof. Because once he made that move, everything would change. Stella would wage war. His daughters would rebel. His legacy would hang in the balance. But he knew that somewhere in the cracks of Lagos, a forgotten heir had been waiting. And if that heir was truly his son, the kingdom Stella tried to protect would come crashing down. Madame Stella stood by the French windows of her private sitting room, sipping from a glass of red wine that didn't calm her nerves. The report had come in, a photograph, blurry but clear enough, showing a boy standing beside a bent old woman outside a wooden shack in Mushin. The boy's face had a striking familiarity. Too striking. Her grip tightened on the glass until it shattered in her palm. Blood trickled down her fingers, but she didn't notice. That face. That cursed face. It was Ngozi's child. She was sure of it. The child was supposed to be dead, buried in the darkness of Lagos, like a roach. And now he was alive, standing, growing, worse, looking exactly like her husband. Her enemies, it seemed, had been sleeping in her house all along. She pulled her phone and called her fixer, a man named Ngozi, who handled things too dirty for even her own bloodied hands. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply said, handle it. Make the problem disappear. Widow and child both. Ngozi moved quickly. A short man with a calm smile and dead eyes. He slipped into Mushin, disguised as a bottled water supplier. In 2 days, he had mapped out Mama Grace's routines. He knew when she left for the recycling center, when Chabik went to school, and when the compound emptied. He sent 2 boys, young and reckless, to warn her first. They ransacked her home while she was away and left a chilling message on her wall written in red paint. He is not yours. When Mama Grace saw the message, she collapsed to the floor and wept, not for herself, but for the boy she had come to love more than life. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the mat, a kitchen knife hidden under her wrapper, her eyes on the door. When Chabik asked why she looked so scared, she lied. "Na rat spoil my door," she said, forcing a smile. But her heart beat like a drum of war. She knew now, whoever had abandoned this boy once, wanted him gone forever. What terrified her most wasn't just the message, it was the silence that followed. Ngozi made no more noise. That meant something darker was coming. She went to the local police, but they laughed her off. "Na vision you day, see Mama Grace? Wouldn't dem one collect from poor woman like you," she was told. They dismissed her as an old widow losing her mind. Desperate, she went to a local prophetess who prayed over the boy and whispered, "This child carry royal blood, and those who want him dead sit on golden chairs." Mama Grace returned home with fire in her belly. She began keeping a small black nylon bag under her pillow, containing Chabik's few documents, a backup school uniform, and all the cash she had saved over years. If anything happened, she told herself, I go run. But deep down, she knew there was nowhere to run. They had found her. They knew the boy. And they wouldn't stop. Her only hope now was truth. And the truth, she feared, might break everything. It happened on a Thursday morning just before dawn, while the street vendors were still yawning in their stalls, and the sun had barely licked the rooftops of Mushin. Mama Grace had gone outside to sweep the compound, a ritual she never missed, when she noticed something strange. The front gate, usually rusty and heavy, was slightly ajar. Her stomach tightened. She glanced back at the room where Chabik slept, then moved toward the gate slowly. That's when they struck. 2 men in hooded sweaters, faces half covered, emerged from behind the broken fence and grabbed her from behind. One muffled her scream with a gloved hand. The other shoved her against the cement wall with brute force. "We warned you, old woman," one of them hissed. She kicked and fought like a lioness, screaming Chabik's name. Her cries echoed through the compound, waking a few neighbors who peeked from their windows but stayed hidden, too afraid to interfere. Mama Grace bled from the forehead, her wrapper torn, her arm scratched. "Leave the boy, or next time we burn this place down," the other man growled before shoving her to the ground. And just like that, they were gone. The aftermath was chaos. Chabik came running out, barefoot and terrified. He saw Mama Grace on the ground, bleeding and shaking, trying to sit up. "Mama, who did this?" "Mama," he cried, holding her face. Neighbors emerged slowly, pretending to help while whispering behind her back. "Maybe she offended one local gang," they said. But Mama Grace knew this wasn't random. This was a message, a warning. She looked into Chabik's eyes and saw confusion, and fear, and more than anything, guilt. He felt like this was his fault. And in a way, she knew it was. But it wasn't his doing. It was his bloodline, his story. A story no one had yet told him. That evening, the compound was filled with whispers and side glances. But Mama Grace remained silent. She packed her bloodied wrapper and quietly cleaned her wounds, refusing to go to the hospital. She didn't trust anyone anymore. The system had failed her. Her neighbors mocked her. The boy's real enemies were out there, and they had money, power, and no conscience. That night, Mama Grace did something she had never done before. She wrote a letter. She addressed it to whoever finds this, and placed it inside the nylon bag with Chabik's documents. She then gave Chabik strict instructions. "If anything ever happens to me, run. Go to the church. Ask for Pastor Dan. He knows how to find safe people." Chabik, barely 15, nodded through tears. He was too smart not to understand. Someone wanted him gone. Mama Grace had never been this scared, even in all her years of widowhood and hunger. But what made it worse was this. She still didn't know why. Who were these people? What did they want from a boy raised in trash? That night, She locked the door 3 times, laid Chibik beside her, and held a knife in one hand and a Bible in the other. She whispered, God, if you day heaven, protect this boy. I no fit do this alone anymore. And somewhere far away, in a glass mansion lined with gold, the woman who started this storm smiled at a call, confirming the attack. The old woman is shaken, the voice said. Stella closed her eyes and exhaled. Good. Now let's make sure she breaks. The next few weeks were a dance of shadows for Mama Grace and Chibik. She no longer allowed him to walk to school alone. She began watching every face on the street, every stranger, every parked car. She forbade him from playing outside, from visiting friends, from attending any school events. The life she once built with fragile peace had now turned into a fortress of fear. Chibik noticed the change. He wasn't a child anymore. He had seen her bruises, heard the screams, felt the tension in the air. One night, as the wind howled outside and the power supply cut off again, he looked at Mama Grace in the dim candlelight and asked the question that had burned in his heart for years. Mama, who am I? Where did I come from? The question struck like thunder. Mama Grace's heart dropped. Her hands, which had been folding clothes, paused mid-air. For a long moment, she said nothing, but she knew she couldn't lie anymore. He was too old, too wise, too close to the truth already. She sat down and took his hands in hers. I no born you, she said finally, tears already rising. I find you. One night many years ago. And then she told him everything. How she had found him in the trash. How he had been wrapped in torn cloth but looked like royalty. How she had feared reporting him because of what it might bring. How she had raised him as her own, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. I know your mama, she whispered. But something tell me say your life, no, ordinary. Chibik sat frozen, silent. His whole world crumbled in a moment. He was not her biological son. He had been dumped like refuse. Yet he was alive. And safe. Because of this woman. A fire lit in his heart. A desire to know more. To understand where he came from. And why someone now wanted him dead. Do you know who my real parents are? He asked. Mama Grace shook her head. I know. But I get feeling say, big people they involved. People way go kill to cover secrets. Chibik didn't sleep that night. He lay on the mat, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Who was he really? And why was his existence dangerous enough to warrant attacks? At school the next day, he began paying closer attention. He studied his classmates' features, their names, their parents, their accents. Then it happened. During a school debate competition, the panel chair was none other than Chief Obinna, the school's main sponsor. The moment Obinna looked at Chibik, something in his face shifted. His smile dropped. His eyes widened. The crowd clapped for the boy's eloquence, but Obinna was frozen in his seat. And Chibik, unaware of the identity of the man watching him so closely, felt something strange stir in his spirit, like a cord had been plucked. It was only a moment, but in that moment a seed of truth was planted, a seed that, no matter how deeply buried, would one day break through the ground. Chibik stood out at Mainland Royal College, not for his clothes or his pedigree. He had none of that, but for his mind. He had become a quiet marvel among the teachers and a threat among the elite students. In a school dominated by politicians' children, CEOs' offspring, and the Lagos elite, his presence as a scholarship student for Mushin made him a subject of both curiosity and mockery. His tattered shoes repaired with thread and glue, his shirts washed until they faded pale blue, and his humble lunches of moi and pap earned him the nickname Gutter Genius. But Chibik was unbothered. He had fire in his eyes, and a mind sharper than any insult they threw at him. However, among all the students who ridiculed him, none cut as deep as Kamsi, the girl with silky wigs, branded handbags, and a venomous tongue. Kamsi was the daughter of the school's largest sponsor, Chief Obinna. She often mocked him in front of crowds, saying things like, I hope they fumigate this school. It smells like the gutter today. Chibik responded not with words, but with excellence. One morning, during a speech competition, Chibik delivered a powerful address on leadership and legacy, using proverbs that silenced the entire auditorium. He quoted Achebe, referenced Mandela, and closed with a haunting line: "You can't kill the future just because it was born in the trash." Even the judges applauded. But Kamsi seethed. She laughed loudly and said, "I think he memorized that speech under his shack roof." The crowd laughed, but her father, Chief Obinna, seated among the panel, did not. He sat frozen, his hands clenched. There was something about the boy's voice, his eyes, even the angle of his jaw that triggered something painful in him. He leaned to the side and whispered to the principal, "What's that boy's full name?" The principal answered, "Chibik Grace, one of our best students." The name made Obinna blink. Grace? The surname didn't match, but something else did: the eyes. It was like looking into a mirror of youth. For a moment, he felt dizzy. The thought terrified him. Could this be him? At home, Kamsi mocked Chibik further. She posted edited pictures of him online, calling him Trash Boy, adding laughing emojis. When it went viral within the school's social group, Chibik said nothing. But Mama Grace saw the post through one of the neighbors' phones and wept quietly in her room. "Dem wan kill this boy's spirit," she said. "But they know Sabi say King's Day born from mud too." She hugged Chibik that night, whispering, "The more them laugh, the more God go prepare your table." Yet Chibik couldn't ignore the deep questions burning inside him. Why did that man stare at him that way? Why did his heart beat strangely when he heard the name Chief Obinna? And why did Kamsi's insults feel more like jealousy than hatred? That night, he opened a small notebook and wrote just one question: "Who am I really?" Ngozi hadn't been dead. Not in the physical sense. But she had died many times over in the years she spent hiding like a ghost in Benin Republic. After the night she left her baby in the trash and led the armed men away, she had been hit by a Danfo bus while trying to escape. She suffered a skull fracture and spent 3 months in a Catholic clinic, comatose and nameless. When she awoke, she remembered fragments, flashes of blood, of a crying child, of chasing shadows. The nuns took her in, and she spent years healing her body and slowly rebuilding her mind. They called her Sister Mercy. But one day, as she swept the convent yard, she heard a man say on the radio, "Chief Obinna's daughter wins Lagos debate competition." The name sliced through her like cutlass. Memory returned like a flood. She wasn't Sister Mercy. She was Ngozi. She had a son she had left in the trash, a son who might be alive. She collapsed that afternoon and screamed for hours. Her body healed, but her soul broke all over again. She left Benin and returned to Nigeria under a false name, carrying nothing but an old rosary and a folder containing all the clippings she had secretly collected of Obinna's family over the years. For months, she lived in the slums of age, begging, washing clothes, gathering rumors. She paid a mechanic's apprentice to teach her how to use Facebook. It was there she stumbled across a viral post from Mainland Royal College: "Trash Boy versus Billionaire's Daughter." It had Kamsi's photo and Chibik's. Her heart stopped. That face, those eyes, that jaw. She knew her child. She didn't need a DNA test. That was him, Chibik. Alive, tall, handsome, articulate, but being mocked and humiliated in public. She screamed so loud the neighbors thought she was mad. She packed her bag that night and went straight to Mushin. She asked every woman selling yam or tomatoes, "Do you know a boy called Chibik Grace?" They pointed her toward a compound that looked like it might collapse in the next rain. Mama Grace opened the door cautiously that evening, holding a pestle like a weapon. But when she saw the woman's face, something in her chest softened. Ngozi fell to her knees. "I'm his mother," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to, but I had to leave him. They were going to kill us." She broke down crying. Mama Grace didn't respond for a long time. She simply looked at her, this woman who had bled out her own child into the world and left him in a war zone. "You're late," Mama Grace said. 16 years late. But eventually, she let her in. And when Chibik returned from school and saw the strange woman in his house, something inside him shifted. He didn't know who she was. But when she called his name with that broken voice, he felt it in his bones. The storm had returned. But this time, it came bearing truth. The room was quiet like a graveyard. The only sound was the ticking of a plastic wall clock, and even that felt like thunder. Chibik sat across from Ngozi, eyes wide, body stiff, his school bag still strapped to his back. Mama Grace stood silently in a corner, watching like a judge. Ngozi could barely hold her tears. "My name is Ngozi," she said, her voice trembling. I'm your mother." Chibik blinked. The word hit like a rock. "But," Mama Grace said, "my parents died in an accident." Ngozi's lips quivered. "She was protecting you. From the truth. From me. From everything." Then she told him the story. How she had been chased, how she had hidden him in a trash bin, how she had been hit by a car and spent years lost. She spoke in halting sentences, sometimes pausing to catch her breath or fight back tears. Chibik listened, unmoving, until his lips began to tremble too. "You left me. You let me grow up in trash. You gave me away." The pain in his voice was sharp. Ngozi tried to touch him, but he pulled back. Mama Grace stepped in, her voice low but steady. She did what she had to. No woman abandoned child unless death day chase her. "I saw that boy in the gutter. No note. No cloth. No chance. But I took him. I raised him. Not because I had much, but because God put him in my path." Chibik looked between them both, his heart torn. He wanted to hate Ngozi, but something in her broken eyes wouldn't let him. She had suffered too. She wasn't wicked, just wounded. "Why now?" he finally asked. "Why did you wait until I'm almost grown?" Ngozi wiped her eyes. "Because I only just found you. I didn't know if you were alive. But when I saw your picture online, I knew. I knew you were my son." Mama Grace sat down, her voice cracking for the first time. "No matter who born you, I'd be the one way carry you when you day sick, way sleep hungry, so you fit chop, way fight dogs for your school fees. Don't forget that." Chibik stood there, broken, unsure. For the first time in his life, he had two mothers, and no idea how to love either, without betraying the other. That night, the room was heavy with silence. Chibik lay between two women, one who birthed him and the other who raised him. Neither slept. Mama Grace stared at the ceiling, afraid of losing the boy she called son. Ngozi curled in the corner, crying quietly, her fingers gripping her rosary until her knuckles turned white. And Chibik? He stared at the wall, thinking of all the nights he cried himself to sleep wondering why he didn't look like Mama Grace. Thinking of all the insults, the shame, the pain. And wondering if he was ready to carry the weight of the truth now that it had finally arrived. Outside, the rain fell, soft at first, then heavy, as if the heavens themselves wept for what had been lost, and what could still be saved. When word reached Madame Stella that the ghost mistress was not only alive, but had been seen near Mushin, her carefully manufactured world shook to its core. The call came from her informant, a cleaner who worked as an errand boy for one of her projects in the mainland. "Madam," he said shakily, "the woman day back. I swear. I see enter one compound yesterday." Stella nearly dropped her wine glass. Her heart thundered in her chest. Ngozi? Alive? After all these years? She sat down slowly and clenched her fists. Her first instinct was fear, not just that Ngozi had returned, but that she had brought the boy with her. That boy was the only threat to Stella's control over the Obina Empire. The only reason she wasn't yet divorced. She had faked piety, hosted charity events, even played the grieving woman of God role to hide her secret. She had ordered a hit on a mother and child. And now they were back. She couldn't afford to wait. If Chief Obina found out, everything would crumble. Her status, her daughter's inheritance, her name. The next morning, Stella made a call to her most loyal fixer, Ngozi. "Plan B," she whispered. "We need to end this. Permanently." Ngozi understood. Ngozi would not survive this time. But Stella wanted it quiet. No guns. No witnesses. "We'll ace the boy's food," she said coldly. "Then plant drugs in her bag. Make it look like she was using him to traffic. Let the press destroy her before she can speak." She smiled as she said it, then paused. "And the widow?" Ngozi replied. "She's too loud already. Maybe a little fire accident in the night." Stella laughed. "Perfect. burned the trash heap back to ashes. That evening, two men in yellow shirts, posing as gas delivery workers, visited the compound. They surveyed Mama Grace's room and dropped off a small cylinder with a faulty valve, assuring her it was safe. Then, while Ngozi stepped out to fetch sachet water, they broke into her nylon bag and slipped crushed sleeping powder into the small pot of beans she had left warming on the stove. The plan was simple. Let the boy eat, collapse, and die. Frame the mother. Make it look like negligence, or worse, poison by a mad woman claiming lost motherhood. But fate had its own timing. Mama Grace, ever suspicious, caught the whiff of a strange chemical scent in the beans as she stirred it. Something about the smell felt wrong. Her years of suffering had sharpened her instincts like a blade. She sniffed the pot again, then called out, "Chabik, don't eat yet." She scooped a spoon and tasted it. Instantly, her throat clenched and her stomach churned. Her eyes watered as pain shot through her belly. "Jesus," she cried, dropping the spoon. Ngozi returned just in time to see the old woman stagger to the floor. "They want to kill him," she gasped. "They know where we are." In a panic, Ngozi and Chabik rushed her to a local clinic. Mama Grace survived the poisoning, but the message was clear. Ngozi stared at her trembling son and swore through gritted teeth, "They came for us again. But not this time. This time, I'll take the fight to their gates." She reached into her bag and pulled out the last thing she had, a baby photo, a blood-stained wrapper, and a phone number she hadn't dialed in 16 years. Chief Obinna's. Chief Obinna sat in his private study, surrounded by the smell of leather chairs and imported brandy, when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He ignored it once, then twice. But the third time, something in his gut urged him to answer. The voice on the other end froze him mid-breath. "Obinna, it's me. Ngozi." The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. He couldn't speak. For a full minute, there was silence. Then, "You're dead," he whispered. "I buried you in my mind years ago." Ngozi's voice was calm but sharp. "You almost buried your son too. But God saved him." She told him everything. How she escaped the attack, how she left the child in a trash bin to save him, how she'd been comatose, how Mama Grace had raised him. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She just spoke with the fire of a mother who had nothing left to lose. "His name is Chabik. He's alive. He's yours." Obinna's world tilted. His past and present collided like thunder. He whispered, "Bring him to me. We'll do a test. If it's true, I'll fix everything." Ngozi didn't trust the mansion. She didn't trust Obinna's house, his guards, or the walls that might still listen to Stella. So she arranged for a private DNA sample at a discreet Lagos laboratory with Obinna's personal doctor. It was done under false names. Saliva samples were sealed. No public files. No fingerprints. Within 48 hours, the result came. Obinna sat in his Range Rover, parked on 3rd Mainland Bridge, staring at the envelope as if it carried a live bomb. His fingers trembled. He ripped it open. The first line read, "Probability of paternity, 99.99%. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just leaned back and closed his eyes as the Lagos sun burned his skin. His son had survived. After all the blood, the loss, the regret, his son had lived. That evening, he drove alone to Mushin in a plain car, no escorts, no noise. He arrived at Mama Grace's doorstep and fell to his knees before her. "Thank you," he said through tears. "You raised a prince in ashes. God will reward you." Mama Grace was speechless. Chabik stood behind her, stunned. His biological father, a man of wealth, power, and fear, had just bowed before a trash picker. But the joy was short-lived. Stella found out. The lab technician, bribed or careless, let a copy of the report slip. Stella read it alone in her dressing room, her perfectly applied makeup cracking with rage. "He has a son," she whispered. "He found the boy." Her eyes darkened. She threw the report into the fireplace and called her lawyer. "Draft a clause. If he tries to change the will, we'll go to war." But Stella knew the will wasn't enough. She needed to destroy the boy publicly before Obinna announced anything. So she organized a press conference under the guise of launching a new charity, Hope for Street Children. But her real plan was to discredit Ngozi. She paid off 2 journalists to publish false reports that Ngozi was mentally unstable, that the boy was a fraud coached to pretend royalty. And worst of all, she released old, doctored CCTV footage of Ngozi wandering barefoot in Benin after her accident, painting her as a mad woman unfit to be anyone's mother. The war had begun, and the battlefield wasn't just DNA. It was reputation. The Obinna household exploded into chaos. The moment Chief Obinna summoned a private family meeting to address a personal matter, Stella knew her time was short. She sat stiffly beside Kamsi and her sisters as he spoke, his voice low but thunderous. "I have a son," he said. "His name is Chibik. He was born 16 years ago. And he is alive." Gasps filled the room. Kamsi's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" she spat. "We are your only children." Obinna didn't flinch. "No," he said. "Yo motalit." She tried to erase him, but he survived. Stella stood and slapped the table. "That's a lie. This is what you bring into our home. A trash boy? A bastard? After all I've done." Obinna rose too. "You almost had him killed, Stella. Don't act righteous now." Their shouting match echoed through the mansion like thunder rolling over a dry field. The daughters watched in horror as the perfect family image shattered in real time. Chibik was brought in the next day for a formal introduction. He stood humbly in a simple shirt and trousers, his hands clasped before him. Stella didn't rise. She refused to even look at him. Kamsi stared, then laughed mockingly. "So this is the heir," she said. "This thing from a slum?" Chibik's hands tightened into fists. "Call me what you want," he said softly, "but you can't change who I am." Obinna clapped slowly. "That's my son. That's the strength I missed." But the tension didn't ease. Within the week, social media exploded. Obinna's secret son? Slum boy claims inheritance. Wife versus mistress showdown in Lagos. Bloggers feasted. Neighbors whispered. Friends vanished. Obinna tried to shield Chibik, but the damage had already begun. At school, Kamsi humiliated him further, cutting him off in hallways, spreading rumors. His mother was a prostitute, she told anyone who listened. His father's a fool. Chibik kept silent, but the pain was heavy. Mama Grace, watching from her tiny room, knew the boy's soul was cracking. She pulled him aside one night and said, "Kings don't answer every dog barking at the throne. Let them talk. Let the storm pass. Your truth go shine." But Chibik wept in her arms that night. "I never asked for any of this. I just wanted peace." Mama Grace held him and replied, "Peace no day, follow royalty, my son. You go fight, and you go win. But never forget who held you when the world threw you away." Meanwhile, Stella prepared her next move, one that would break the boy completely. If DNA couldn't erase him, shame would. She began digging into Mama Grace's past, anything, any weakness, any skeleton that could be used to smear the woman who raised the boy. Her war was not over. It had only begun. And this time, she vowed to destroy the roots, not just the fruit. The court was packed. Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled. The case had ignited public interest across the nation. Obinna's secret heir versus the noble family empire. The court hearing wasn't just about paternity anymore. It had become a moral trial, a class war, and a spiritual reckoning. On one side sat Chief Obinna, Ngozi, Chibik, and Mama Grace. On the other, Stella, her daughters, and a swarm of high-paid lawyers. At the center of it all sat Mama Grace, a tired old widow in a faded wrapper and borrowed court shoes, gripping her Bible like a shield. The opposing counsel tried to dismiss her as a scavenger who found an abandoned child and is now seeking financial gain. But Mama Grace stood, trembling slightly, and walked to the witness box. Her voice shook, but her words carried weight. She described that rainy night, the cries, the trash, the helpless baby. "I didn't raise him for money," she said, her chin rising. "I raised him because I had love and he had none. I carried him when nobody else would. I stood in fire for him when his own blood tried to burn him." The room fell silent. The judge, an elderly man with salt and pepper hair, nodded solemnly. Stella's lawyer tried to twist Mama Grace's story. If you cared so much, he asked, why didn't you report the boy? Why hide him from the authorities? Mama Grace looked him dead in the eye. Because I no trust your system, she said, switching to raw pidgin. Now the same system way they work for rich people like Madam Stella. If I carry that boy go police, dem go sell am like pure water. So I keep am. I raise am. I train am. And now, una want talk say na mistake. Her raw truth broke the courtroom like a thunderclap. Even the judge seemed to pause. Chief Obinna lowered his head, tears in his eyes. He knew this woman had done what he, with all his money and power, could not do. She had kept his son alive, nurtured, and dignified in a world that treated poor people as disposable. Then came the final blow. Mama Grace reached into her wrapper and produced the original cloth she had wrapped Chabik in, the same one Ngozi had left him with. The court clerk examined it and confirmed the blood-stained initials sewn into the fabric. C.O. Chabik Obinna Okonkwo. Stella, seeing her fortress fall, screamed from the back bench. This is a setup. A trap. This child is nothing. A scam. She was silenced by the bailiff. But her panic was too late. The court erupted in support of Mama Grace. The media swarmed around her, calling her Mama of the Year, Mother of Lagos, and the guardian of a forgotten prince. The judge slammed his gavel and declared, this court recognizes Chabik as the biological and legitimate son of Chief Obinna. Furthermore, this court honors Madam Grace Nwosu for her selfless role in safeguarding the life and dignity of the boy. As the judgment echoed through the room, Mama Grace turned and looked at Chabik with tired but fulfilled eyes. You see, she whispered, truth no day, fear light. Stella's fall was not sudden. It was a slow, public unraveling. The day after the court's ruling, Obinna called an emergency board meeting. For years, Stella had influenced key decisions behind closed doors, blocking Ngozi's charity proposals, diverting funds, and manipulating estate affairs. But Obinna had had enough. With the legal truth now public, he made it clear. Stella would no longer have any say in his personal or business life. She stormed into the meeting furious, screaming that the board was corrupt and biased, but Obinna calmly pulled out evidence, bank statements, transfer records, and most damning of all, surveillance footage of her private meetings with Ngozi, the man who had carried out the attack on Mama Grace. The entire room gasped. Even her daughters looked stunned. You were willing to kill a child, Obinna said coldly. Your hatred nearly turned this family into a crime scene. Stella tried to deny it, but the proof was undeniable. Her reign was over. The media took the story and ran wild. Madam Stella exposed dark secrets of the billionaire's wife. Blogs dug up years of hushed scandals. How she had threatened other mistresses in the past, how she'd bought silence from victims, and how she'd bribed her way into Obinna's company board during a vulnerable time. Social media users posted side-by-side images of Chabik in his school uniform beside Stella's luxury SUV, calling her the snake in the palace. Kamsi, once the queen bee of elite society, suddenly found herself sidelined at parties. Sponsors dropped her fashion brand. The other daughters were pulled out of their international schools pending internal family audits. For years, Stella had built her empire on silence and intimidation. Now, the same tools she used to rise were dragging her down. Obinna, despite everything, gave her one final dignity, a quiet exit. She was escorted out of their mansion in Ikoyi, her suitcases loaded in silence, as staff whispered behind curtains. The final image that would go viral was one taken by a hidden camera. Stella, standing in front of her gate, clutching her handbag, looking lost for the first time in decades. Alone, unmasked, stripped of power. Meanwhile, Mama Grace was being honored at a local ceremony, holding a plaque that read, "In honor of unseen mothers." She didn't care for awards, but Chabik stood beside her proudly, gripping her hand. Ngozi, still in quiet awe of everything happening, wiped her tears as she stood behind them. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity. And now, finally, Stella, the woman who tried to bury them, had been buried by the truth. Not in the grave she dug for others, but in the consequences of her own lies. And while the world watched her fall, Chibik, Mama Grace, and Ngozi slowly began to rise, together. After the storm came stillness, unfamiliar, awkward, but deeply needed. The mansion no longer echoed with the chill of Stella's rage. Obinna, now a man stripped of illusion, spent more time in silence, seeking meaning in the small things, morning walks, family dinners, the sound of his son's laughter. Chibik was officially moved into the family estate, but he refused to stay in the master wing. "I'm not used to marble floors, sir," he had said. "I'll take the back room near the garden." He also insisted Mama Grace and Ngozi live with him, but in their own quarters. "We're not changing who we are," he said. "We're just changing where we live." Obinna tried to smother him in gifts, cars, clothes, tutors, but Chibik rejected most of it. He wanted to finish school like a normal boy. He wanted to earn his seat at the table. And more than anything, he wanted to keep the one thing that kept him sane, Mama Grace's evening prayers. Ngozi, still learning how to be a mother again, treaded carefully. Some mornings, she cooked breakfast and waited for Chibik to take a spoonful. Some days he did. Some days he didn't. But every day he greeted her. Slowly, they found rhythm in shared chores, old photos, and laughter over memories neither of them fully remembered. She learned to stop crying when he was distant. He learned to understand that love could grow even from broken roots. One afternoon, she brought him a box of childhood things she had saved from her apartment in Benin, a clay rattle, an old baby bib, and a tiny picture frame with the word hope carved into it. He stared at it for a long time, then hugged her, tight. That night, Mama Grace saw him sitting between them both, quietly peeling oranges. She smiled. "3 mothers," she teased. "Now only you get am." Chibik laughed softly. "No be me. Nah God." Obinna began formally training Chibik in business. He introduced him to the board, allowed him to sit in on meetings, and slowly prepared him to inherit the company. But Chibik had bigger plans. "I want to build something that helps boys like me," he said one day. "Children born into trash, forgotten by the world." Obinna nodded. "Then I'll back you. But you'll lead it." That was the beginning of the Chibik Foundation, a youth empowerment initiative with Mama Grace as honorary matron and Ngozi as director of women and child development. Newspapers called it the Second Chance Dynasty. But for them, it was healing. Pure, slow, painful healing. For the first time in years, they could sleep without fear, eat without anxiety, laugh without shame. The battle wasn't just won, it was survived. Together. And in the quiet of that restoration, Chibik finally understood. He wasn't saved by money or bloodline. He was saved by love. One widow's stubborn, enduring, unstoppable love. It was a quiet Saturday morning when Chibik stood before the freshly painted gate of the new house that overlooked the hills of Lekki. It was modest by Billionaire standards. 2 flats connected by a central garden, surrounded by flowers Mama Grace had picked herself. He stood between the 2 women who had given him life in different ways. Ngozi, the mother who birthed him through tears and pain, and Mama Grace, the mother who raised him through storms and hunger. That morning, in a brief private ceremony, Chibik handed over the keys to Mama Grace. "This house is yours," he said, voice shaking. "You once lived in a 1-room shack and gave me the world. Now, let the world give you back your peace." Mama Grace stared at the golden keys in her palm, her hands trembling. "Nah lie," she muttered. "Nah dream be this." She turned and looked at the small plaque just outside the gate. It read, "Grace Villa, for the woman who made a prince from the gutter." Her knees buckled. She dropped to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. She never asked for this, never dreamed of this. She had simply followed her heart. The news of the house dedication spread like wildfire. Social media buzzed with the hashtag from trash to treasure. Journalists who once ridiculed Chibik now praised him as the most inspiring youth figure of the decade. Even his former classmates, including Kamsi, went silent. Obinna stood quietly behind the cameras, letting his son have the spotlight. He had learned humility from the very boy he once thought he'd never know. Chibik gave a short speech, not grand or rehearsed, but raw and real. "I don't want to be remembered as a rich man's son," he said. "I want to be remembered as the child a poor widow picked from trash and turned into a man." His words pierced the hearts of many. The crowd clapped. Some cried. Mama Grace simply wiped her face and held his hand. Ngozi hugged him from behind, whispering, "Your life is proof that light always wins." That day, Chibik didn't just make headlines, he made statement. That wealth was not in gold or houses, but in the people who stand by you when the world leaves you behind. That evening, Chibik sat alone in the garden, staring up at the sky as stars blinked into view. Obinna joined him, bringing 2 bottles of malt, the way men did when they had something to say without saying it. They sat in silence for a while before Obinna finally spoke. "I failed you. I failed your mother, but God kept you." Chibik nodded slowly, "And he gave me a second chance to forgive you." The 2 men sat there for hours, just father and son, no wealth, no title, just men rebuilding something broken. Inside the house, Mama Grace tucked herself into bed with her wrapper neatly folded, still in disbelief that the mattress under her was hers to own. Ngozi stepped into the kitchen, preparing stew with a smile, her eyes no longer heavy with regret. The home was filled with peace. No bodyguards, no servants, just family. And for the first time in years, they all slept without nightmares. A year later, the grand ballroom of Civic Center in Victoria Island was filled with guests from all corners of Nigeria: governors, CEOs, schoolchildren, widows, journalists. The occasion was the official launch of the Chibik Foundation's National Initiative for Abandoned Children. Chibik, now 18, stood tall in a traditional white igbada, with a subtle embroidered phoenix rising along the hem, a symbol of rebirth. Ngozi stood beside him in a simple lace gown, her eyes proud and humbled. Mama Grace wore a gold wrapper and geli, her smile beaming as if the sun itself bowed to her joy. When Chibik took the stage, he didn't begin with his achievements. He began with a photo of a trash heap projected onto the massive screen behind him. "This is where my story began," he said. But someone bent down in her old age, in the midst of stink and shame, and picked me out of it. That's what love looks like. That's what motherhood is. The hall went silent. Some gasped. Others cried. To every child thrown away, you matter. To every mother doing her best, we see you. And to every system that overlooks the poor, we are coming for you. The thunderous applause that followed wasn't just admiration. It was a cultural shift. Government officials pledged support. NGOs offered partnerships. Even rival companies signed on for expansion. But the most emotional moment came when Chibik walked to the center of the stage, turned to Mama Grace, and said, "Before this nation, I honor you." He pulled out a small box and opened it, a custom-made medallion shaped like a heart made from recycled copper, engraved with, "To Mama Grace, the mother of my becoming." He walked down and placed it around her neck himself, then knelt and kissed her feet. The room erupted. It was no longer about a billionaire's lost son. It was about a boy whose worth was found not in bloodline, but in the soul of a widow who chose to love him when the world didn't. Mama Grace sobbed uncontrollably, whispering, "Now you make me somebody." Ngozi held her hand, eyes closed in silent gratitude. And Obinna watched from the front row, hands folded, knowing that his legacy would live through this boy, not because of wealth, but because of heart. The story that began in a trash bin ended on a golden stage. The enemies were silenced, the truth vindicated, and the forgotten had been remembered. In a follow-up interview, when asked what his greatest achievement was, Chibik didn't mention his mansion, foundation, or scholarship awards. He simply said, "I never let where I came from define where I'm going. And I never forgot who carried me there." As the sun set that evening, the new family walked out together, Chibik between Mama Grace and Ngozi, all 3 smiling, all 3 redeemed. From nothing to everything. From rejection to remembrance. From trash to legacy. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.